So I saw this post on Facebook from the Calling Christians page, which is maintained by a very bright and intelligent young Muslim apologist. I'm under the impression that the post relates to tonight's debate between David Wood and Mohammed Hijab on the subject of the doctrine of the Trinity and the Orthodox Muslim interpretation of TawHeed. Perhaps the post will even reflect some of the arguments which Mr. Hijab might employ in tonight's debate. So I wanted to briefly explore the claims found within this interesting meme put out by the intelligent young man who runs the Calling Christians page on Facebook. Now, I recognize that it is basically a meme, and memes cannot be exhaustive. So while in this video I will argue that each of the points lack a certain nuance, I'm sure the creator of the meme himself recognizes that, of course, there is more that could be said. Memes are designed more to scratch the surface, to get people thinking, and inspire further discussion. So I don't mean these criticisms too harshly. I recognize that a meme can't cover everything, but nonetheless I wanted to offer some of the nuances that are missing from the meme. So here are my thoughts on what's found in the meme. First, I honestly would take a minor bit of issue with the title, just the title. There are many discussions where the Trinity is contrasted with TawHeed, and Christians fall into this trend as well. However, I would argue that these are actually not mutually exclusive options. Rather, you can have both insofar that the doctrine of the Trinity is a type of TawHeed. Now, if one wants a clearer distinction, then the contrast would have to be between the Trinity and specifically the Orthodox Muslim interpretation of the word TawHeed. I say this because, with all due respect to my Muslim friends, some Orthodox Muslims put artificial restrictions or artificial limitations on the word TawHeed, trying to limit it to a semantic range which encompasses only a sort of unipersonal or Unitarian monotheism, where the one God is indivisible, unipersonal. The reality, however, is that the semantic range of the word TawHeed is more expansive than some Orthodox Muslims let on. Consider, for example, the Arabic phrase Tawheed ad-duyun. This refers to the consolidation of debt. It literally means the Tawheed of the debts, in the sense meaning the unification of one's debts. So the word Tawheed ad-duyun, in that phrase, the word TawHeed does not preclude multiple debts being united within a single unification. For another example, consider this official UN document. For those who don't know, Arabic happens to be one of the 6 official languages of the United Nations, and so all official UN documentation is available in Arabic. This particular document was a joint document between the General Assembly and the Security Council. It was a letter from Syria's permanent representative to the UN, so it was actually originally written in Arabic. In other words, this is not a translation, rather this is the Arabic original. I'll provide a link to the document in the video description. Now, I bring this document up because the word TawHeed appears twice towards the end of the document. First, we have the phrase TawHeed juhuduha, which means a unification of their efforts. And then again, a little bit later on, the nearly identical phrase Tawheed al-Juhud, which means a unification of the efforts. In short, Syria was calling for the different member states of the United Nations to work together and unify their common efforts in combating terrorism. And it used the word Tawheed to describe the consolidation of those international efforts. For still another example, consider the Arabic Wikipedia entry on German reunification. I'll provide a link in the video description. Note that the title is I'adatu TawHeed Almania, literally a return to the unification of Germany. And notice that the word TawHeed right there in the title, right there in the center. Now think about this. The word TawHeed is employed to refer to the single unified Germany. But does that word preclude Germany from comprising multiple states or even multiple persons? Of course it doesn't. That aside, a perhaps more relevant example I would give is the Arabic phrase Tawheed azawja. This is an Arabic phrase for monogamy, where you're only married to one wife. Though, and in fact, one might more literally translate it, oneness of the wife, Tawheed azawja. Now compare that phrase to the phrase Tawheed Allah, oneness of God. The grammatical structures of these two phrases are identical. Now, suppose I said my wife comprises a body and a soul, or hundreds of muscles and hundreds of bones. Or actually, just to focus on bones, suppose I stated that my wife encompasses over 200 bones in her skeleton. Would that somehow mean I therefore have more than one wife? Of course not. So I would offer this rule of thumb. Proper osteology is not polygamy. The phrase TawHeed al-Zawja does not preclude my wife from encompassing multiple bones. Now, with that before us, I would argue that so too, proper theology is not polytheism, as the word TawHeed Allah does not preclude God from encompassing multiple persons. When the word TawHeed is applied to God, it is an affirmation of monotheism, but it does not necessitate that the one God is unipersonal. The doctrine of the Trinity, which posits that there is only one God, encompassing three persons, is therefore a form of TawHeed. Going to the first line of the meme, it states that TawHeed is summed up in the 15 words of Surah Al-Ikhlas, while the Trinity has Christians using the entire New Testament collectively. In one sense, I would say that this is a fair point, insofar that the Bible does not lay out the Trinity in a single passage, rather Christians treat it as the message of the Bible collectively. On the other hand, however, I would object if by TawHeed we mean specifically the Orthodox Muslim Unitarian interpretation of TawHeed. Now, I do agree that Surah Al-Ikhlas is very clear on its monotheism, but a sort of unipersonal conception of God is not clearly summed up in Surah Al-Ikhlas, i.e. the 112th chapter of the Qur'an. When I look at Surah Al-Ikhlas, I don't see anything therein which precludes a multi-personal conception of God. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that the surah necessarily refers to a multi-personal conception of God. Rather, I'm saying it simply declares the oneness of God without going into much detail about the one God's ontology. It seems to leave the question of whether the one God is unipersonal or multipersonal open. It's an open question when you read Surah Al-Ikhlas. Now, Orthodox Muslims might object that the word ahad means God is unipersonal. But the reality is the word simply means one. Elsewhere in the Qur'an, there are multiple instances of the word ahaduhum, which literally means one of them. And it's referring in those various instances to a single human being from a larger cohort in various contexts, of course. Now, the word does not mean that the person in question is indivisible. That's a point to keep in mind. Or, that aside, one could simply Google the phrase ahad al-qaba'il, which means one of the tribes. And if you Google that phrase, you'll get tens of thousands of hits, literally tens of thousands of hits. Ahad al-qaba'il. In that phrase, the word ahad does not mean that the tribe under discussion is unipersonal. In short, the word ahad can be used to refer to a single entity which comprises multiple persons. Somewhat ironically, the word ahad appears again at the end of the chapter of Surah Al-Ikhlas, the very last word, when the last verse states that nothing is equal to God. That verse can apply to anything, I would think, just about. It would mean that I am not equal to God, and your tribe is not equal to God, and the entire unified state of Germany is not equal to God. Once we admit that the verse can be applied in these different ways, we're actually conceding that the word ahad there can indirectly reference something like me, or your tribe, or Germany, which would mean that it is not restricted to entities which are indivisible or unipersonal. Food for thought. A proponent of the idea that Surah Al-Ikhlas necessarily implies a Unitarian conception of God might point to the singular pronoun huwa. They might argue that a single pronoun means one person. However, the reality is that in Semitic languages, a singular pronoun refers to a singular entity without necessarily requiring that single entity to be unipersonal. You could use a singular pronoun to refer to a impersonal object or a unipersonal entity or a multiple personal entity. For an example, consider this sports article from CNN Arabic, from the Arabic language page of CNN, which is about the soccer player Bastian Schweinsteiger, who played for Manchester United. Near the start of the article, Schweinsteiger is quoted as saying, Manchester United huwa akhar fariq Sa'ul'ab, or Manchester United is the last team. Manchester United is the last team I will play for. But notice the singular pronoun. Notice the singular pronoun employed at. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. But notice the important part here is to notice the singular pronoun employed as a copula. It states that Manchester United huwa akhar fariq. The singular pronoun does not preclude the team, Manchester United, from comprising multiple persons. I think that's clear. Now, someone else might appeal to the third verse of the chapter, which states that God neither begets nor is he begotten. I could get into the nuances of what this could mean, as well as the semantic range of the relevant verb, and we can even bring in verses like, Psalm 92 and stuff like that, and argue that the verb in the relevant Quranic verse doesn't necessarily preclude the mysterious begetting of the Son before all ages, as it's stated in the creeds. But instead of going down that road, for now, I'll just say that the verse is simply irrelevant to the question of whether the one God is unipersonal or multipersonal. Those who try to appeal to this verse are almost unwittingly conceding that it can refer to a God with a multipersonal ontology, just not one which begets or is begotten. In short, even if one wants to try to use this verse against the Christian doctrine of the Father begetting the Son, it does not in any way preclude a multi-personal conception of God. That's the relevant point here. So that's why I don't really want to get into that too deeply right now, but we can discuss it further in the comments if one wishes, or maybe in future videos. Now, getting back to the meme, the second and third lines note that there were no councils which clarified TawHeed, while there were lots of Christian councils, ecumenical councils, etc. It argues that there were 0 years of development for TawHeed, while the Trinity has developed over millennia. I think this is an interesting point, and, fair play to the very intelligent young man who came up with the meme. He has quite an interesting mind and line of thought, but nonetheless, here too, I think it's potentially misleading. At the very least, there has been some development of the concept of TawHeed. That can be seen in how Orthodox Muslims have to appeal to later sources, putting artificial limitations on the word when it is applied to God, and ignoring how the word is used in basically all other contexts. It gets more interesting if we take into account the understanding of heterodox groups, like, for example, the Alawis and others, to show that while there are disagreements amongst professed believers in the New Testament, so too there are disagreements amongst professed believers in the Qur'an. So, I don't know. If disagreements across millennia entails development across millennia, then I think that something roughly parallel to that exists for the word TawHeed. I mean, honestly, we're disagreeing about it right now. Finally, the last line of the meme states that Jews agree that TawHeed is monotheism, while Jews agree that the Trinity is polytheism. I'd say, on the one hand, it is fair to say that Jews are unanimous about the Orthodox Muslim conception of God, while the Jewish understanding of the Trinity is less unanimous. There's significantly more polemics there. Like, Jews aren't polemicizing against the Orthodox Muslim conception of God, but there are lots of Jews who polemicize against the Trinity. I think at the very least that's a fair point by the young man who made this meme. However, I would say that Jewish understandings of the Trinity is honestly a bit more complex than this meme lets on. For a minor example, I'd like to consider Rabbi David Berger's very interesting book, The Rebbe, the Messiah, and the Scandal of Orthodox Indifference. The book is written by an Orthodox Jewish rabbi who is a critic of Christianity. I want to make that clear. He's not a fan of Christianity, or he's not sympathetic to Christianity. The book is somewhat of a polemic against a prominent Orthodox Jewish group, Chabad Lubavitch, which the author feels has been guilty of blurring the line between Judaism and Christianity. Now, again, the author is no fan or defender of Christianity, but he does make an interesting concession in passing. The book's second appendix is titled The Parameters of Avodah Zarah, and in my opinion, it's one of the more interesting chapters in the book. Within that chapter, the author states the following on page 160. For Christians, and I'm quoting here, quote, "For Christians, the fact that Jesus was seen not as a separate deity, but as the embodiment of the one creator God made all the difference in the world. Many Jews agreed, some of them with emphatic enthusiasm, that this point distinguished Christianity from paganism," end quote. Now, the author goes on to present a case for why those Jews were mistaken, but the point remains that it shows that not all Jewish thinkers are agreed on this point. And I think that's an interesting point to keep in mind when claiming that all Jews agree that the Trinity is polytheism. That aside, I would also note that Jewish polemics against Christianity can often obscure the greater complexity and nuance which exists within Rabbinic Judaism itself. For an example, consider what the Rabbinic Corpora states about the Shekhinah. Now, we can begin with the 33rd chapter of Exodus, specifically verses 9 through 11, where God speaks with Moses. It's interesting to see the commentary of Rashi on these verses, as Rashi is one of the most authoritative commentators within Rabbinic Judaism. When commenting on verse 9, Rashi notes that Targum Onkelos renders the portion about God speaking with Moses as, quote, mitmalel im Moshe. Now, the word mitmalel can be interpreted reflexively, and if that's done, if it was read in that sort of a hyperliteral way, it would mean that God spoke with himself with Moses. That might sound strange, yet that is precisely how Rashi understands it. Rashi explains as follows. He writes, Hu kebod shechina, i.e., this is with regard to the Shekhinah. In other words, he's saying that the phrase mitmalel im Moshe, when it's describing God speaking with Moshe, is with regards to the Shekhinah. God speaks to himself by speaking with the Shekhinah. Rashi adds, Hakol medaber beino lebein atzmo. The voice spoke between itself and to itself. In other words, Rashi is explaining that God spoke to the Shekhinah and Moses listened to that. Now, think about the implications there. God speaking to the Shekhinah constitutes God speaking to himself. With that in mind, I'd like to turn to the Zohar, specifically Parshat Pinhas, paragraph 126, according to the ordering of the Sulam. The text there opens with this incredible line, Amar Kudsha Brichu, Ana Ushkinti Shutafuta. The Holy One, blessed be He, said, I and my Shekhinah are partners. The text goes on to explain that God and the Shekhinah are partners in the formation of the soul, the way mother and father, or analogous to the way mother and father are partners in the formation of the body. In short, however, the text is calling the Shekhinah God's partner in creation. Let's keep that in mind as yet another premise. Now we can turn to another text in the Zohar, that being Parshat Yitro, paragraph 404, according to the ordering in the Sulam. The passage is commenting on Exodus 23, one of the Ten Commandments, which reads, Lo yihyeh lecha Elohim acherim, there shall not be to you other gods. Then the Zohar offers this commentary on that verse, Elohim acherim la'apaka shechinta, which means the phrase other gods does not apply to the Shekhinah. Now think about the implications here, collectively, from Rashi and from these two passages in the Zohar. When God speaks to the Shekhinah, God is speaking to himself. The Shekhinah is God's partner in creation, and a verse precluding recognition of other gods does not apply to the Shekhinah. All of this is within the scope of a declaration that there is only one God. I share this to make this point. When one gets into the deeper, less well-known aspects of the rabbinic corpora, the possibility for something akin to a multi-personal conception of God seems to come into play. So merely appealing to Jewish polemical opinions about Christianity is unhelpful insofar that it is devoid of the deeper nuances within rabbinic Judaism itself. In closing, I want to again say that the meme was an interesting one. It was a thought-provoking one. And it was, again, made by a very intelligent young man. I know that this discussion does not end here, but I wanted to offer some of the nuances which weren't found in the meme in anticipation of tonight's debate on the Trinity and TawHeed between David Wood and Mohammed Hijab. I look forward to discussing this with others, and I look forward to tonight's debate. God bless.